Everybody had a good week. We're back and excited to do another show here.
Absolutely.
And this is going to be an interesting one. And what a great topic of discussion. Idol worship. Idol worship. What could be better in today's world than talk about idol worship? I mean, the way you look at it, idol worship, thousands of years ago, it was all the rave. It was the bomb.
Right.
I mean, it was the thing that everybody was worshiping idols. We had idols for the sun, the moon, the sand, the desert, and just like that, it was gone.
Right.
Which I don't get. Because idol worship, to me, makes the most logical sense, especially back in those days. If you lived by the sea, you built yourself a little octopus, little thing to worship, and that would make sure you had a good catch that year, make sure the monsoons didn't wipe out your village. If you lived in the desert, you had a little sun kind of idol there, and you'd protect your crops. And if you lived in the mountains, whatever, or if you're a little girl, you had yourself a Justin Bieber idol, so you can worship that type of idol.
Right.
It's convenient. And if you went on vacation, or if you went to the next town, you pack all your idols up in your old kit bag, and you take them with you. And then you pull them out at night and you worship it. And then the great thing about idols, they were like us. They were jealous. If you worshipped your sun idol too much, then the night you had to sacrifice to the night moon idol because they were jealous. Just like people. What a perfect world.
And you can always bring back a new idol from vacation.
Right. Hey,
find this new idol.
I brought you back a new idol.
Yeah.
And then you start worshiping that. I don't understand why that went away. It was everywhere, and then just like that, now we understand the Jews. I get that. We had a little problem there with the golden calf, the one behind us here. Mm-hmm. We had a problem, so we got taught a lesson, so we weren't idol worshipers anymore. But I don't get it with the rest of the world. What happened? Where did they go?
That is a fascinating question, because, when you read the Torah, you don't get too far where there isn't some kind of admonition about not doing idolatry.
Yep.
And you're thinking, I got it. I mean, what's the big deal? Don't do idolatry. I mean, and we don't even understand idolatrous people. Did that really make sense? Is the guy bowing down to some statue and he really thinks it's going to help the harvest? He's going to kiss a little statuette and somehow or another, his wife who hasn't had children for 20 years, now all of a sudden he's going to have how does that work? It's kind of crazy, the whole thing, idolatry. Yeah. And why did Torah spend so much time talking about it? So, we start off with one assumption, and that is that people always have been just as smart as we are.
Wait, that people?
People,
just
in
people.
general.
Okay.
People. It's not like all of a sudden we're smart.
I got you.
You have this the caveman thing, to go, I'll go, me hungry, boom, and he's hitting people over the head, and then the guy got more sophisticated, and then he's walking with an attaché case. Now he's a sophisticated guy, but he used to be. So we believe, because we also believe in creation, we believe that God created Adam, so we believe that people were sophisticated all along.
Right.
Now, maybe technologically, I don't know, that's a different story, but, sophisticated as well as far as thought goes, as far as understanding and grappling with questions about the world, about meaning and all this type of stuff, people always have been smart.
I mean, we had some good philosophers back in those days, and we still talk about them today.
Yeah, Homer, Plato, they didn't seem to be stupid people, but even going back further than that, it wasn't like all of a sudden Plato became smart. Plato's parents were probably smart too, and so were his grandparents and his
smart
grandparents.
People, yeah.
Yeah, so we believe that people were smart. Abraham was a sophisticated guy. His grandfather was a sophisticated guy, and so on and so forth. So, therefore, why was it that in those days people were actually bowing down to idols, which doesn't seem to make a bit of sense to us? And nowadays, of course, we look back on that and we go
that's gone.
Yeah. And where'd it go? So, guess what? I'm here to reveal the truth. We got rid of it.
That's why they call it Jeff and the Rabbi, because the Rabbi's here to tell the truth.
Here you go. We got rid of it. But first, I want to share with you an idea, and I'm not plugging this theory per se, but there is something to this that's going on, and that is there's a theory called the axial era. Axial era, from axis, axial. And the axial era is, there was a German philosopher, I think his name was Jasper, and he noted, sometime back around 1950 or so, he noted that when you look at world history, all the major religions seem to catch on at about the same time.
Okay.
Within the
That's
same
right.
couple hundred
Right.
years, right? All of a sudden, the major religions seem to catch on, and the Greeks developed Greek philosophy at about the same time. So Confucianism and Buddhism and Greek philosophy and Zoroastrianism, right? And even we find developments within Judaism all seems to hit at about the same time. And then, of course, after Judaism, a little bit later on comes Christianity and Islam, but those are, we consider them generally to be outgrowths of Judaism.
Right.
And they both recognize the Bible and so on and so forth. But where all of a sudden everyone's idolatrous, and that's proven by archaeology over and over and over again, the world was idolatrous, and then all of a sudden at some point the world shifted around and all of a sudden becomes
And
religious.
all about the same time. Is what
And within a
interesting,
certain
yeah.
time frame. Now, we Jewishly correlate that to an interesting development. There is a passage in the Talmud, actually in 3 different places it shows up in the Talmud. Primarily, though, there's a source in the tractate Sanhedrin, and in a couple of other places, that says that, let's get ourselves a framework in Jewish history. Jews came in out of Egypt, through the desert 40 years, moved into Israel. They were living in Israel for about 400 years when they built the temple.
Okay, yep.
King Solomon, King David, King Solomon, and all that. They lived in that temple, they had the temple, and they lived in the country for about 400 years. And then the Babylonians came and exiled them to Babylon. Jews are living in Babylon. Then Persians knocked off the Babylonians, now the Jews are living in Persia. Okay. They allowed the Jews to start to go back to Israel, and some went back. Most of the others didn't. They stayed behind. They were already getting a little comfortable out there in Babylon and Persia. But some of them went back, and they started to establish a new settlement or a resettlement of Israel, and they started to rebuild the temple.
Right. Okay.
They rebuilt the temple, and they got it up and running. And at that point, the people were still struggling with idolatry. And the Talmud describes the struggle with idolatry to be something that was essentially inside of a person. It was a lust. It was a yearning. It was something that people did and it made them feel good. It wasn't a philosophy. It's something that they liked, that they wanted to do.
So just deep down that they felt they needed it.
Right. It's like the urge for the sexual urge, which the Talmud compares the two, and even in this story the two are very much intertwined. It's not a philosophy. It's something that people do.
Yep.
There's no philosophy to it. You don't have to write books about it and explain the philosophy. No one writes why I believe in sex.
Well, there's some interesting books these days on the internet. You just got to whatever.
But people just generally do it.
Right.
It's not a philosophy. It's not something you believe in.
True.
It's not something you're for it. It's not people. Maybe sometimes people will go to war for the right to express themselves in a certain way or another. Right? They might do that to express themselves sexually one way or another, but by and large, it's not something that people believe in. You could be a conservative or a liberal or a Democrat or a Republican, you can still believe in this particular urge. Idolatry used to be the same way.
Interesting. That's interesting.
The Talmud says that people used to do it and just love it. It made them feel good. They had a lust for it, they had a desire for it, they got a release through it. It was something that just tugged on them, and they did it. Even if they believed in God, they still had this yearning to do it. And therefore, it fits in the Torah, along with a lot of other things.
Right.
Like the Torah says, I know you've got a lust to do this, but don't do it. I know you got a lust to do that, but don't do it. Well, you got a lust to do idolatry, but don't do it.
Right.
It's a big challenge. You got God, idolatry. And sort of that was the choice. Am I going to go with God, or am I going to go after idolatry? Now, in order to make it a fair fight, God had to he had to spot idolatry a few points. right?
All right, true. Okay.
Because otherwise, let's say God says, well, I want you to believe in me and don't bow down to idols. So everyone would have gone like, well, of course I'm not going to bow down to idols. That's the stupidest thing.
That's easy.
Yeah, great. Okay, I should I believe in God or a totem pole? Oh, okay. No, so that's pretty stupid. So what God did was he put a little thrill into that totem pole, so that when you bow down to the totem pole, it's like, ooh, wow, that was an experience, right? That turned me on. So it was a lust. So now there's a real tug of war. The problem with that tug of war, they were supposed to, of course, decide within that tug of war to put aside the idol and go with God. But the rabbis saw that they were losing. People weren't putting aside idolatry.
Right.
So the rabbis said, they prayed to God. They said, God, please, we're supposed to have idolatry in the world to accomplish something. But we're losing. We're just, take away the desire because we just can't win.
When you say the rabbis, which rabbis did this?
That is great. So this is a group of people. You can Google this one. It's called the Men of the Great Assembly.
Gotcha.
The Men of the Great Assembly lived during this inter-temple era, they lived from the exile to Babylon, starting around then, and into the early phase of the Second Temple.
Okay.
There were 120 men on this body. They seem to have organized themselves and decided to create their own body. You don't find anywhere in the Torah that it calls for such a thing. And they became like the governing body of the Jews in exile and of the Jews when they returned to Israel. But they never created themselves to be a perpetuating organization. So there's no way you could get on. They appointed 120 people to it.
Gotcha.
And when someone died, then they had 119.
Right.
Someone died, they had 118. And when the last guy died, it was done.
That's the end of it.
That's it.
Okay.
Because there's no way, it never had any mechanism to appoint new people or have elections or appointments or nothing. So it was a one-time thing in all of Jewish history. They made a number of really, really important enactments that very much define the way Jewish world is today. But for our purposes, one of the huge things they did was they said, forget this idolatry thing. We're done with it. God, please, please, please take it away.
And you're saying God did?
And God said, yep.
Just like that.
God said, yep, we're going to take it away. Going to take it away.
So just like that, the people of the world stopped worshiping idols.
Pretty much. All of a sudden, people kept doing it, and people still do it today because, it's a sort of like a habitual thing, but the lust just wasn't there anymore. The zing was out of it, and people stopped doing it. Now, once people stopped doing it, all of a sudden, they started asking themselves questions like, well, what is the meaning of life? And like,
right.
Where did I come from? And what am I supposed to be doing? When they were obsessed with idolatry, they didn't ask these questions as much. They didn't need it. Idolatry really, really kept them busy.
Yeah, you got to take care of the idol, make the idol happy, and you'll be fine. You'll live, you'll survive.
I like compare it to the following. Let's say you're teaching a classroom of 15-year-old boys, okay? And you're teaching them whatever subject it would be. And let's say you could just turn off the lust for sexuality for an hour. Let's say you could just do that for an hour.
You probably learn a little better.
All of a sudden asking, that's a fascinating corollary you just taught there, Professor. Can you explain a little bit? All of a sudden they're doing their business, they're doing because they got nothing else to think about.
Right.
All of a sudden they start thinking about, all of a sudden they're fascinated, they're doing their homework in 1/18 of the time.
Right.
Right? Everyone's taking AP courses because
TV doesn't get turned on.
They got
internet, you know about
right.
it.
All of a sudden, internet traffic decreases by 30%, just like that. Boom! One day it's okay. Things would be drastically different.
Different world, yeah.
And all of a sudden, people would start thinking about a bunch of stuff because they would just find that A, they have a lot of extra time on their hands.
Yep.
And B, some of these questions that kind of get drowned out because you're so busy pursuing your, who's thinking about ultimate issues? I'm busy getting off to worship Zeus, I gotta get to the temple for the action,
That's a good point. Good point.
So now all of a sudden people are asking themselves, well, where does it come from? What's going on in the world? So all of a sudden the Zoroastrians are coming along and they're going, well, it's really a struggle between good and evil. And Buddhism is coming along and saying, well, there's really a oneness and we're trying to have that. And Confucius is, all of a sudden, now these people were around beforehand, by the way. It wasn't like no one ever existed that had any of these philosophies. But they started to catch on because the masses started to turn to these different people and teachers and start to examine their teachings and start to put them in their world to fill in the void that was created by turning the noise of idolatry off.
Wow. So literally, people were neutered of their idolatry pretty much here, and once they were neutered of their idolatry, I noticed that with my dog was the same thing. He had a lot more interest after that. Watch TV with me,
Right, right. All of a sudden he started loving daytime soap operas.
He was watching soap operas, we ate snacks together, talked together, football.
Right.
So that's kind of what happened to the world there.
Exactly.
Wow.
Now, there's some other things come along. There's some good, there's some upsides, there's some downsides. You see, the world didn't know religious hatred either, up until then. Now, it is true, one country may have hated the other country.
And you might have hated the Hebrew people, but you didn't hate the religion.
That's right. You know why? I maybe, to tell you the truth, I don't really even hate the Hebrew people. You know what I like? I like their country, and I like the money that's there, and I like the taxes that are there. So maybe we'll go march on them, and we'll conquer them, and maybe I needed a whole bunch of new slaves, so that country next door seems like a good place. So, of course, there was war, and of course, people were clashing with each other for resources and wealth and power. I mean, that's always true, with or without idols. And of course, when they went to war, they took along their idols, and they kissed them up, and they prayed to them a whole bunch, and they went out to the war.
Right.
But the guy that does idol A, he doesn't hate the guy that does idol B. Like the sun god guy doesn't hate the moon god guy. He says, I got it. You do the moon god. I'm glad I got the sun god because the sun god's more powerful than the moon god. But I don't hate you because when you
not that
believe
inbred hatred of, I got you. No, that makes sense.
But if you've decided to go Zoroastrian and you believe in the struggle between good and evil, and I've decided to go Buddhist,
that's a big difference in life philosophy there,
I picked a philosophy, and you don't believe it? You know what you're doing? You're saying, I'm
an idiot.
Yes, exactly. I'm an idiot, pal. You're sitting there going, how did you believe that? This is stupid. God doesn't have a son. That's stupid,
Right.
Or God didn't talk to your guy. He talked to my guy. Right? How can that be? What are you telling me that your guy descended from heaven? It's like, give me a break. That's ridiculous. What are you telling me? He didn't descend from heaven? That people get really mad about.
It would have been easier if we just kept our little Fred Flintstone idol there that we worshipped, and that would have been I don't care if you like Barney Rubble and I like Fred Flintstone. It wouldn't be that big of a difference.
Now things get nasty.
Right.
And by the way, now things get particularly nasty for the Jews. Because where the Jews fit into all this. See, the Jews, wherever they go, are certainly the odd man out.
Oh, no doubt.
Once, big swaths of the world start to buy into this religion or that religion, pretty much wherever the Jews are, they're odd man out.
The other guys, yeah.
Right? Or even other philosophies, like Greek philosophy. Right? The Greek philosophy, and although they had a bunch of gods and things like that, the Greeks, it's true, the Greeks had gods and many gods, but by the time the Greeks were doing it, and certainly by the time the Romans were doing it, they were doing it more as like a vestige of something that had once been. It's like, it's a way to go, but they didn't really believe in it all that much. But they had philosophy. The Greeks create a philosophy of life, which they explained what's going on. They have Helios and, this whole, the light and the energy, and you've got Aristotle is all of a sudden it's like, where did it all come from? And there's a prime mover and all that. That's because the idolatrous noise was turned down, and you got a guy like Aristotle stepping in. And maybe Aristotle did worship his idols, but that's just sort of like the truth is, there's a lot of people that will go to church on Sunday or synagogue on Saturday, and they're not thinking too much about God. They're going because it's what you're supposed to do,
Well, yeah, we still have that today.
My dad did it. His dad did it. I did it when I was a kid. I still do it. So this is where religion comes from. With religion, you got religious hatred. That's problematic for the Jews because wherever the Jews show up in any other country, they're always the odd man out, and people don't like them. And especially because the Jews are pretty snobby because they say, "Oh yeah, whichever religion you have, we were there before.
Right.
We were there first. We had religion first." Didn't used to be that people hated Jews. Didn't used to be that people hated Jews. When the Babylonians conquered Israel, they did not hate Jews. They wanted to conquer Israel. And they conquered Israel, and they said, just pay your taxes, everything will be okay. If you read in the book of Kings, you'll see that they refused to pay taxes. So Nebuchadnezzar came back, and he stomped on them, and he hauled them all off to Babylon. But when he got them to Babylon, he let them do their religion. He didn't care about their religion. He was an idolater. It didn't bother him.
Oh, interesting.
It did not bother him. He allowed the Jews. Now, when the Persians took over, it's really interesting. When the Persians took over, they were Zoroastrian. That's into the era of religion. They believe that Zoroastrians believe in a good God and a bad God, God of light, God of darkness, and they're in a constant struggle. And they explain everything that goes on in the world by this constant struggle. Well, they had problems with the Jews. We see, for example, it talks about in the Talmud that during their holidays, they had holidays where all the light only could have light in their temple. So if Jews would light a light, if anyone lit a light anywhere outside of the temple, so there's a whole question, what if it comes up on the Sabbath? You have to light your Sabbath candles and things like that. So you see that the Jews are already laying low because they don't want to get in the way of this religion, because that's a struggle, that's a conflict. So for the Jewish people, though, there was an upside. It wasn't all downside. There was an upside. And the upside is that the whole nature of Judaism changed because once idolatry was there to offer an option to people so that they could choose God. We are a big freedom, free will, choice religion. Okay? We're really pro-choice. Okay? We're pro-choice. You get a chance to choose God or not. It's a choice.
That's true.
It's a choice. We're pro-choice. We believe in having the choice to choose God or not choose God. In doing so, of course, there has to be some counterbalance, has to be a good alternative. So when idolatry was lustful, and you had God, so there was a counterbalance. Once you took away idolatry and lustful, well, then there's no choice anymore. So God recedes to the background. And we start the era where God is not very overt. What happens? They prayed that idolatry would be taken out of the world. Guess what else missing from the world?
God backs off as well.
No prophecy anymore. Because
true.
prophecy is an overt expression. Like, prophet shows up, God spoke to me last night, and he wants me to tell you to do X, Y, and Z. Well, you're not getting that anymore.
No.
God's not overt in the world. God is sort of behind a veil. You could see him, or you could choose not to see him. That's what the Purim story was, by the way. The Purim story is the opening round, the first Jewish story of the new exile era, of the new era when God isn't overt. God's not overt because idolatry is no longer overt. Idolatry is no longer overt. Now it's into the era of religions. Whole different story.
Wow, good tie in there at the end with Purim and everything. I like that. Wow.
Yeah, that's it. And I think finally we're going to turn loose of Purim.
That's it. No, we have to. No, but that makes sense. I like, because that is, that makes sense. That's the timing. Back out the idolatry, God backs off as well, and there's no more prophecy.
Yep. If you look up this stuff, it's called the exile era, and there is there are some differences in the timing and the exact dating about between Jewish scholars, secular scholars, and I'm not necessarily endorsing this exile era, but I think this guy did come upon something that with modification could be explained by our passages in the Talmud.
Well, pretty good. This is good stuff here.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's interesting. Okay, so the bottom line is and you're right, because no one worships idols anymore, and that's why. That makes sense. That's why.
Right.
Yeah,
this is an idea that there was a rabbi named Rabbi Hutner, and he passed away in Israel in the about 1980, early 80s, and he sort of put this idea together. And recently I saw a more recent scholar was writing about this, and he made that correlation with the exile era. And I think there's something there to talk about.
I got something new today.
There you go.
Good when you learn on a Monday. It's good. rest of the week, and you're fresh. You got new knowledge. You can tell all the people.
Gets the mind throbbing.
Robbing. Go to the water cooler. Tell everybody else.
Yeah.
Good stuff. This Jewish stuff is good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have more Jewish stuff next week.
Okay. See what we come up with.
See you then.